Hello everyone, this is part 8 of What If Naruto Was a Scientist Like Orochimaru, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
9 a.m. Allied Shinobi Forces Headquarters. Hidden Waterfall Village. Naruto kicked open the door and was immediately surrounded by at least 30 ninjas. All of them were wielding an array of weapons, or at least had their fists up, and were in rigid fighting stances. Behind the spider summoner, his samurai friend sighed tiredly. Naruto bravely walked forward, pulling Aoki-chan with him by her left hand, and glared up when a shinobi at least 2 feet taller than him blocked his path to his target. Lord Shibuki, can you call off your dogs? Naruto shouted around the person blocking him. Or I'll have to go through them just to talk to you. He felt his hand being tugged and he spared a quick eye over his shoulder, looking at his guard's solid gaze, then back again. He grumbled. I would like to discuss something with you. His eyebrows twitched with irritation as he added. Please. I don't know how you got past our defenses, I don't know how you got past my shinobi, and I don't know how you broke through our ranks to get to this building. Shibuki, leader of Waterfall Village, began as he waved for his shinobi, as well as the other allied ninjas, to stand down. He walked around the command table, with Mei and Tsunade following suit, to stand in front of the teenager. Aoki-chan bowed deeply to the village leaders and they acknowledged it with curt nods, though Naruto didn't follow her example. But right now I don't care. I heard you were looking for me. Naruto said while looking straight at Tsunade and fixing his goggles better with a sharp smirk. Well, here I am. The blonde Senju frowned darkly at Naruto. I'm tempted to have you arrested here and now. Naruto scoffed and had to be pulled back by his Ronin best friend so that he wouldn't physically butt heads with the Hokage. We both know I won't go down without a fight. It was hard to explain, but there were a few people that by just looking at Naruto would get infuriate him. Jiraiya, Kakashi and Tsunade were those few people. Tsunade crossed her arms strongly and lifted her chin up. That won't need to happen. We need your help. She looked around him, seeing as she wasn't tall enough to look over his shoulder, even though she was a relatively tall Kunoichi, and spied the group of Konoha ninjas outside of the circle of ninjas surrounding them. Her eyes returned to the younger ninja. I take it Team 7 informed you of your purpose. They have. Then you can begin as soon as possible. She said and made to turn around, but stopped when Naruto laughed under his breath. The blonde boy lightly jabbed his elbow to the girl holding his hand and nodded to Tsunade. She thinks she can command me, that's hilarious. He hollered and was about to rush forward to the woman again, if not for his hand being hurriedly pulled back. Naruto snarled evilly at Tsunade, who took a step back at the abruptness of his faltered attack. One moment he was a blur, the next he was back normal in the same spot. The spider summoner bared his teeth and lowly toned. You don't own me, Lady Tsunade. The Senju covered the gulp that built up in her throat and tried to keep her eyes leveled with the cold blackness of the goggles from the S-ranked Uzumaki. Because I agreed to help in this war does not mean you can issue commands to me like I'm one of your shinobi. I work on my own terms and at my own time, and if I see it fit I would kill one Akatsuki member a month. Do you understand what I'm saying? He was yanked back again and his expression twisted with irritation when the woman remained unmoving. He cracked his neck and the sound of it echoed through the deathly silent building. Tsunade nodded slightly and Naruto's face bloomed into a smile. That's the spirit. Now, before I can render my services I have a few conditions I want this esteemed gathering of leaders to agree on. He slapped his forehead when he remembered something. He turned to Mei and waved. How's the war treating you, Lady Mei? The Mizukage shrugged tiredly. Not too good, Lord Naruto. The Uzumaki hummed and scratched his chin. I see. His hidden red eyes roved back to the Hokage and he continued. Do you want to hear my conditions or are you desperate enough to agree right away? Let's hear them, she grated. First I want full immunity for our crimes and I want our names to be wiped off the missing ninja, Ronin list of our respective villages. He said this as he motioned to Aoki-chan. Mei and Shibuki were all for it but Tsunade was hesitant. What Naruto did during his time as a Konoha ninja and even after that were abominable, disgusting acts of inhuman depravity. He was wanted in more than a dozen countries and his name was hot on the lips of everyone, not only because of his KDC empire but for his infamy as well. Naruto added. Our names can still be in bingo books but not as rogue fighters. We need to deliberate on this with the others. We can't just jump into these kinds of decisions without everyone being present. The Hokage said with a hint of pleading in her voice. Naruto's eyebrows went down, showing that he was squinting at her, and she hurriedly said, "What are your other conditions?" She hoped that he wouldn't ask for money. Naruto was rich. Money didn't really motivate him anymore, so she could rest easy that he wouldn't ask her for money. That the Kitsugami Drug Company be recognized as a legal organization and that interference from countries were based in, he again motioned between his friend and him, should be stopped completely. We will provide drugs and all but no attacking my workers. We will also table that in our discussion. The Kazekage, Tsuchikage and Reikage were fighting at the war fronts close to their villages and were to return back to the HQ in a few hours. The Hokage and the Mizukage weren't in their respective villages because there wasn't an immediate need for them. Naruto conceded and said, "Lastly, I want Konoha, and all of Fire Country, to leave me alone. I can travel in Fire Country and I can even visit Konoha when I want, but I don't want leaf ninjas randomly jumping me. Aoki-chan's getting bored killing them." This time the usually gentle Ronin beamed with him. "That last one I can personally handle." Tsunade ensured and Naruto nodded for her to continue when he noticed that she still had something to say. "But, yes." He shared a short look with his friend. "I think it would be best if you do something before we can consider your conditions. A certainty that you will pull through on your side. I see where you're going. You want me to prove myself." "Exactly." The woman nodded and Shibuki spoke. "There are 13 main players in the opposing forces: Sasori, Deidara, Kisame, Kabuto Yakushi, Uchiha Madara, a paper jutsu user, the 6 Rinnegan holders and the plant man. I propose that to prove yourself you kill any 5 of them first. This is the Sandaim's challenge all over again." Naruto thought with a roll of his eyes. He was again being placed in an impossible situation with a monumental amount of load placed on his shoulders, on a mission with no room for mistakes. It was all miraculously coming full circle again, but unlike back then, when he was just getting the hang of doing the impossible, he was older. He could handle it. "Anyone in particular? If I may," Mei said, injecting herself into the conversation. "I suggest Lord Naruto kill Sasori, Deidara, Kisame, Kabuto and Madara. If those 5 fall, then the rest would be easy to pick off. You forgot about the plant man. He seems to be a key player, and he needs to be handled quickly." The blonde muttered to himself but nodded. "Fine, but as long as Aoki-chan here gets to deal with Kisame, for some reason she wants him dead." He shrugged laxly, like it was normal for his well-mannered samurai friend to want another person's head rolling so insistently. The leaders nodded immediately and Naruto slowly stuck his hands into his front right pants pocket, not to make the ninjas jump, and pulled out a small clear file with light green contents. "Dip your weapons in this, preferably your long-range weapons, and use them on to attack the plant clones. One touch and they would crumble like rubble." The boy smiled widely at his rhyme, which wasn't really a rhyme. Chakra was and would always be the weakness for any organic living creature, human, animal or otherwise. When an attack was made directly to the chakra, and it succeeded, then there was little to no hope for the victim. The attacks could range from severe infections to simply forcefully injecting foreign chakra into the target's system, a simplified version of genjutsu. When capitalized well, then the person would stand no chance, which was exactly what Naruto brought forward in the small vial he had cooked up in his lab. He had quickly studied the greenish sap in the plant imposters and noted that it was purely liquid nature chakra, something only seen from trees and shrubs but engineered in such a way that instead of simply solidifying when it left the chest cavity it stayed liquid. So Naruto created a sort of solidifying agent that made use of nature chakra from his snakes. The foreign chakra would negatively react with the plant man and they would turn to stone, as was the norm when nature chakra was tampered with by an organic being. The thin liquid had no effect on humans, merely giving the person a small rash on where the liquid came in contact with that would reduce in half an hour, and this was what Naruto detailed to the ninjas. Even a drop of this would take down even the biggest plant clone. He tossed the small container to Tsunade, in case she wanted examined before she used it. "There's more with your apprentice." He jabbed his thumb over his shoulder to the pink-haired medic before he waved. "I'll be going now." He turned and said over his shoulder. "And I almost forgot. If my conditions aren't met after this war is over, then I would kill all of you leaders, starting with you, Lady Tsunade. Have a nice day." He allowed the gravity of his words reach them as he left Hidden Waterfall. Outside the village we find Naruto checking his attire while his nervous bodyguard looked on. The Uzumaki was in a grey and red hoodie, which he pulled up over his head to cast a shadow over his upper face. There was a short-sleeved red shirt underneath it. He was also in black pant, with bandages tied around his feet and his toes, which were in a pair of grey shinobi sandals. The boy sat down on a rock and clipped on his silver senbon launchers. He wavered in place, trying to decide whether or not to wear the curved black stealth guards. He decided not to, seeing as even if he did they wouldn't hide him in broad daylight. He adjusted his feet bandages and idly said, "Is there something wrong?" Aoki-chan stopped pacing around the small clearing and stood in front of Naruto. "I insist I come along with you. You've got Kisame to kill, remember. We can kill him last. If we spread out then we can cover more ground. You're going after 5S ranked ninjas," she yelled, scaring away a flock of birds that nested in a cluster of trees close by. He raised an eyebrow and sat up, perching his hands to his side on the rock. He stared at her for a few long minutes, with her ragged panting and her clenching and unclenching fingers. He instinctively looked over her to see whether she was in her full gear. A white and red midriff shirt, exposing a smooth tan stomach covered my black mesh armor. She was in deep red shorts that stopped at her mid-thigh, with a black sash around her waist, which was where her sword was safely perched in, and black knee socks traveling down into black sandals. Over her torso was a light black coat with a stitched Spider Clan badge on the left breast that she left open, and crossed over her body was her bow, with her arrows stored in a quiver on her back. His eyes slowly crept up from her body to her coal black eyes and he cocked his head to the side curiously. "You don't have anything to worry about. Not this time, Naruto." She halted what he was going to say. "This time you're diving head first against 5S ranks. I have the right to worry." Naruto's lips twitched upwards into a small smile and he smoothly got to his feet, easily taller than her. He pulled down his hoodie and lifted up his goggles to look into her eyes with his own. The blonde slowly placed his right hand on her shoulder and his other hand on her head, smoothing down her neat black hair and tucking a strand behind her ear. The Ronin was trying not to cry. She firmly pursed her lips and tightly closed her eyes. Her hands were shaking at her sides and Naruto slowly smiled. Silently, he ghosted his fingers over her reddening cheeks and she looked up at him. He tried not to frown at the tears she kept at bay. "I'll be fine." She looked into his terror-inspiring eyes unflinchingly before her own dropped. Her hands gently went up to his and she clasped them strongly, holding them between their bodies, making her realize that they were standing embarrassingly close. She gulped lightly and whispered, "What if you won't?" He reached back to his head, her hands followed since they were in his grasp, and he removed his goggles. He fixed them over her forehead and smirked sharply at her astonished expression as he neatly smoothed down her black hair. "How about that?" Naruto's goggles were the first ever things he got from his godmother, Orochimaru of the Sannin. They were his most precious treasures and he would preferably travel to hell, dine with the devil, stay for a few years and return back to earth than lose them, and the implication of what this was not lost to the black-haired girl. Naruto had basically given her his heart and his soul. Aoki-chan felt heat rise up from her belly and take over her face. She bit her black painted bottom lip nervously and shyly looked down, allowing her hair to shadow her burning face. Naruto laughed and playfully bopped her nose. She puffed out her cheeks stubbornly and he gave her hair a last ruffle before he disentangled his fingers from hers. "Don't forget we have that birthday date in a few weeks." She perked up and Naruto beamed when her face glowed, the tears already gone. "Yeah, you promised." The blonde nodded and walked past her, flipping on his hoodie, throwing a shadow over his face once again, though this time his horrifying vulpine red shone from the darkness. He made sure his launchers were under his hoodie's sleeves, with the four main nozzles barely poking out from underneath. "I certainly did." And he leaped away towards where he had heard Sasori and Deidara were last seen. 2 hours later. The desert's close to Sunagakur. Wind country. "This is boring," Deidara yelled to the sky. Sasori didn't even spare the blonde bomber a glance. The duo was flying on a clay bird towards Suna 2, once again, rain destruction and disorder in hidden sand. It was becoming much too repetitive for them, nothing Sasori couldn't handle, but Deidara's whining was slowly getting on his nerves. The wooden man, sitting securely in his solid Hirako puppet, mentally grated as the bomber hissed and spat like a child. Admittedly, Deidara was right. This war was boring. There was no challenge for the remaining Akatsuki and it was pretty much smooth sailing to oblivion. But always winning got tiresome really quickly. The puppet master was immortal, he had all the time in the world to develop himself, but that didn't stop him from starting as soon as he got his body. His collection of puppets and human puppets had drastically increased, and there was also the added perk of taking an already dead shinobi and controlling their limbs to his every whim. Unlike his partner, who was only interested in blowing things up because, apparently, art was an explosion. The redhead sneered. Explosion my A. He stopped and raised his hand for silence. Thankfully Deidara obeyed and shut his mouth. He turned his head around, reminiscent to an owl looking all the way behind him, and his brown eyes remained expressionless as an oncoming plume of dust and sand rushed towards them. Nothing could be seen from the puppet master's face, but he was becoming excited about the prospect of a, hopefully, good fight. The bomber though hooted and commanded his clay bird to circle around the billowing sand when it stopped fully as it got to them. There was a smaller burst of air and the wind was swept away. This time the wooden man's eyes lit up a fraction when he recognized who it was. The killer of Kakazu, Uzumaki Naruto. The boy had a red bandana covering his mouth and nose, tucked neatly so that his hoodie covered the knot tied behind his neck, and if they didn't see the bright red eyes of evil spark from the dark recesses of the hoodie they wouldn't have known it was him. Another obvious sign that it was Naruto was his signature black backpack and the small glinting nozzles slightly popping out from his sleeves. They were his senbon launchers. The boy silently followed them with his red eyes as they circled around him on the bird. Deidara squealed childishly and yelled, "I can't help myself." C3, he fed clumps of clay to his palms and dropped the regurgitated mass down to Naruto. Dynamica's scum. Katsu. He screamed maniacally and Sasori almost cursed him for wasting the kill so quickly, but when, 2 seconds later, there was no subsequent explosion, he looked down. The bomb was gone. Naruto was still looking up at him, analyzing him silently, and when they looked deeper into his eyes they found amusement. This was uncharacteristic behavior for the spider summoner. Reports of those that had encountered him always spoke of how much he laughed and toyed with them, always grinning and nearly always tittering evilly. Now though, he was just standing there, doing nothing but looking at them. S-rank my ass. Naruto mumbled when they duo distractedly followed his diversion, still circling him cautiously on their clay bird. The boy slowly brought up both of his hands, palm up and to his sides, and snapped his fingers. That was when purple-tipped senbon of death rained down from heaven in a glorious shower of light, covering over a 5-mile radius of the desert from the point Naruto stood. Too far away for a body flicker technique to successfully escape and too far for the clay bird to quickly fly from. The two S-ranks looked up in sync at the sudden large, thick cloud of medical needles Naruto had been creating since his unexpected appearance. The teen had summoned 10 shadow clones and had them spread out in a large circle, exactly 5 miles with him at the center, and they were given the duty of creating the storm of poison-tipped senbon. Senbon thunderstorm. Naruto intoned with a large smile on his face, hidden beneath his mouth bandana. He didn't even wince as a few of the needles impaled his body. At that point he was immune to his own poison. The flying bird and the 2 ninjas standing on it were mercilessly punctured by the pouring oozing senbon needles. The bird crashed into the sand with a ground-shaking thump and there was a small, suppressed explosion which sounded more like a low pop than an earth-shattering bang. Naruto guessed that it was because the tissue-destroying poison laced on the tips of his patented needles had charred through the clay bird so much that it was nothing more than a burnt, slightly curved surface. He allowed the needles to continue falling from heaven from thick purple clouds gathered overhead until he ordered for it to stop 5 minutes after it had started. The thin goo on the needles scattered around melted and slithered the ground harmlessly, though the ones eating Deidara and Sasori entered their chakra networks and wreaked terrible havoc. He dusted his shoulders of the few needles that melted on his body and they dissolved into an odorless, colorless liquid. Naruto then started trekking leisurely towards the smoky remains of the 2 S-ranks, his hands in his pockets and his lips pursed at the foul odor that wafted off the debris, a negative effect of using his tissue-eroding poison. He briefly looked over Sasori and cocked his head to the side slightly before he looked at the mad bomber's lifeless carcass. He bent down on one knee and placed his pointer and middle fingers on the quickly rotting flesh of the ninja, all the while holding his breath so he wouldn't have to inhale the foul odor. A small, slow smirk grew on his face when he realized something. After feeling a small pulse on the ninja when there was meant to be no pulse, hell, even Sasori wasn't saved and he wasn't even human anymore. Deidara's eyes flashed open and he madly grinned at Naruto. Meeting Naruto's scary red vulpine eyes, the younger blonde opened his mouth and muttered with amusement dancing in his eyes and vague respect flowing through the orbs as well. Ah! Deidara cackled wildly and screamed. Katsu. And the suicide bomb clone exploded with the magnitude strong enough to destroy an entire major hidden village. Oh 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 oh. Sunagaku no Sato. Everybody take cover. Earth release, mud wall. The bandage-swaddled former sensei to the Sand siblings yelled and erected a wall of mud in sync with other Suna Junin to cover a large section of the village. There were massive clumps of earth falling from the sky and the sky itself even seemed to have acknowledged the magnitude of the explosion. The blue sky had been taken over by light red clouds and the slight wind that blew stopped abruptly. The ninjas grunted in effort as the earth smashed against their shields. The gathered civilians that weren't quick enough to enter the village's bunkers shivered and hugged each other in fear, watching in horror through the cracks as the sky burst into blinding light and even the earth itself seemed to groan under the strain of the blast. The shockwave hit them and nearly half of the shinobi holding the walls were thrown to the ground, destroying their concentration and shattering the defenses. Baki roared in effort and forced 3 seal-less sand clones to burst from the ground and kick aside the rocks that threatened to flatten the helpless civilians and the shocked shinobi. The weight of the rocks falling down from the sky was getting too much, even for the veteran ninjas. They all breathed a sigh of relief when 6 giant arms of sand, erupting straight from the ground around Suna, swept aside the rocks covering their walls, then raised their palms to the sky, palms facing the red clouds weeping rocks and debris, and deftly held strong against the other rocks. They could just barely spy their Kazekage standing on a flying mass of sand, his hand in the air controlling the colossal arms of sand. His eyes were zeroed in on the source of the blast. Oh 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 oh. Maniacal laughing echoed through the vaguely dusty area where the almighty bomb had imploded. The mad bomber slowly rose from the ground, his combat garb in ruins so he tore it off and threw it away, leaving him in a black fishneck vest and brown pants with black sandals. His deranged eyes searched around for the blonde and quickly shot to his right before he looked away as his puppet partner reassembled his body parts from the sand, his heart sealed the main point they were meeting, until his whole body had been formed again. Half of his red hair had been seared off by the blast and his left arm was broken beyond compare, so he threw it off and small blue tendrils slithered out of his burnt sleeve and lifted the left arm of his destroyed Hirako puppet from the sand, connected it back and he experimentally flexed his fingers. His brown eyes carefully searched for the young blonde ninja. Where are you shit-faced motherfucker? Deidara yelled unrestrained and began forcing clay into his hand mouths in preparation. Both S-ranks whirled towards a small spike in chakra more than 20 feet away from them and watched as Naruto's body began reforming, slowly and carefully, by multicolored spiders as large as an average man's hands. Half of his body didn't seem to have any form, just a writhing pile of wiggling spiders clambering over each other to form their master, and the other part was steadily getting to his feet. Part of Naruto's face had not yet been recreated, but it did not reduce the intimidation factor that he was even capable of surviving a blast of that strength. I'm impressed, the blonde said. His hoodie was still fully intact and his bandana was still correctly placed on his mouth, but despite all of this they could notice that the boy had to place a bit of effort in escaping the evaporating blast. They could also sense the wide grin on Naruto's face as the spiders ran up and down his body, forming his right torso and his right shoulder. The boy raised his unformed left hand, a mere pile of moving creatures, and wiggled his fingers. The spiders ran to the tips of his hands and melded together to make his body. Ever so carefully his whole arm was made and his shoulder was reconstructed. I would have been greatly disappointed if my needle storm killed you, but thankfully I still get a chance to have fun. The 8-legged summons at his legs quivered and locked their limbs and teeth together, constructing his upper thigh and his hips, leaving his right leg as a pool of spiders. The teen looked down at the unformed mass with a raised eyebrow and the spiders in turn hurriedly skittered around, finally making his legs. The 2 ninjas watched the display partly in awe, partly in horror. No doubt he had been taught that particular trick by Orochimaru, seeing as the Sannin used the body dispersion jutsu with her snakes when situations go sticky. Naruto idly dusted his right shoulder, shaking off the dust that had been there. There was always an advantage of having these kind of small spiders in his arsenal. When he had felt for a pulse on Deidara's neck and found out that it was a ticking bomb instead of a heart, he immediately destabilized his body. A split second before the explosion vaporized him, or at least maimed him beyond recognition, He had the spiders switch with the scattered needles all around, as far as possible, before they dig into the ground and took cover deep in the sand. He made use of an evolved version of the desert duster, the fastest species in the desert, and even at the moment he could feel a few summons in sooner, dispersing. Yes, he had mastered the body reformation technique and he could do it much faster than he had done, but there was always the intimidation factor he liked to use on his targets. He liked putting on a show of power without actually attacking them so that they see how useless an attack on him could be. If he succeeded, then he had already won the fight. He met Deidara's mad gaze unflinchingly and said, "Now, I'm not interested on how you dodged my storm, I just want to know what your bloodlines would do when White Sage Snake eats your dead bodies." Confident words for a child that barely dodged death. Naruto shrugged. "I just wanted to see if you were worth any effort." And sent him a condescending look, something that boiled Sasori up inside. "You're not, you're even worse than that Sharingan user. I didn't even think that was possible." The mad bomber shook in rage and thrust his palms to Naruto. "I'll make you eat those words, Namikaze." Bird-shaped clay fluttered quickly out of his hand-mouths to Naruto and the boy thrust his right hand over his shoulder into his backpack and drew the dreaded long sword, the grass cutter blade. He twirled the poisoned blade in his grip and swung it around his body, resembling more like an art from than an offense defense. He sliced through the birds like butter, slapped a few away with the flat side of his sword and used the sole of his feet to push a few others aside. The blurry white flying birds swooped around Naruto in the dozens, surrounding him and diving down to him, only to get sliced to bits or kicked into oblivion. "Why aren't they blowing up?" Sasori muttered to his partner and Deidara frowned sharply. "I don't know." The blonde tirelessly sliced and cut apart the birds that came to him. The victims of his attacks dropped to the ground in pieces and melted into a pile of bubbling white ooze. Deidara stopped sending birds to their inevitable death to conserve his clay and Naruto spun his sword in his hands again and flicked it down, sending the last bird spiraling to the sand. "Do you honestly think I won't add a few poisons to my godmother's sword?" He muttered, more to himself, and allowed a drop of thin purple poison to roll down the sharp sides of his weapon and drop onto the ground. It fizzled and bubbled on contact, scorching the sand. Poison and toxins were his specialty and quite frankly he was offended they thought he didn't have a way to destabilize the structural integrity of clay, bomb or not, with a fast-acting solution. "Useless. I would have to do this by myself." Sasori hissed stonily and rolled open a scroll he unsealed from his torso, using a gaping hole in his chest to get there. Red secret technique. Performance of 100 puppets. Sunagakure no Sato. Shouldn't we go and help him? Kankuro wondered aloud to his siblings. They were floating with Gaara on his levitating clump of sand and watching Naruto's fight with the two other S ranks. So far it seemed more one-sided and laid back, on Naruto's part, with the blonde having more ways to negate their attacks than the duo. The performance of 100 puppets was deadly maneuver that the puppet master used and Kankuro didn't wish for death at the cold, wooden hands. "I do not know Lord Naruto well, but I know better than to assist him in a fight," Gaara said under his breath. He crossed his arms and raised his shaved-off eyebrows when Naruto's shoulders shook slightly, showing that he was chuckling lowly. He settled into a slack kenjutsu fighting stance in preparation for the fight. "Why is that?" Temari asked, at all that Naruto was not in the least afraid. His associate, Aoki-chan, has advised the leaders of the alliance not to step in to help him. We would only get in the way. That's unbelievable. No one can face two S ranks alone. Temari said and was about to leap onto her fan to fly to Gaara but a firm hand on her forearm stopped her. "Just watch." Gaara commanded and pointed at the battle. One of the last things Orochimaru taught her godson was to passively utilize the animal nature chakra stored in him to enhance his body and his natural senses. Even though the woman had been formed from a snake, she was still 60% human, so she knew exactly what Naruto passed through every time he intended to enhance his senses with his extra eyes and extra nose. A migraine if he kept up the effort for longer than 10 minutes and a mental blow to knock him unconscious if it went on for 30 minutes, all because of overload of his senses. The Sannin had carefully instructed Naruto on how to separate each eye and each nostril and how to flow through movements like he was truly an incarnate of his primary summons, with the speed and dexterity of his summons. coupled with the fact that Naruto was partly insane and he was very much impossible to tag him without the help of an advanced dojutsu or the intimate secrets of his fighting style, and so far only his Ronin best friend knew that, and even she found it hard to keep up with him. The spider summoner flowed and moved his body, his long sword whooshing with each swing and casting bright, smoothly following after images as it cut through the air. He lifted his left leg up and smashed his heel against the broad sword of a puppet, pushing it away so that he could swing his own weapon and slice through two other puppets, the corroding poisons laced on the blade making the cutting edge even sharper. Naruto easily drove his right fist, his free hand, through the face of a puppet and used its body to block a barrage of kunai spraying from the mouth of another puppet. He swung his sword and cut through two more oncoming puppets, still holding his motionless wooden shield, and grinned widely, getting more interested as more puppets rained down on him. Sasori watched, mesmerized, as the scientist sliced, hacked and broke his puppets. Each movement wasn't wasted and each thrust welcomed an opportunity for either a punch, a kick or another thrust, moving much too unpredictably for him to keep track of. Suddenly Naruto's red eyes shone brighter in his hoodie and the boy simply swished his weapon through the air 5 times, each encircling his body, wildly missing a few puppets, and he flicked a few drops of blood onto the ground, pointing it to the sand and staying in that position. There was silence, until criack, crack, pop. The puppet master and the mad bomber felt a sharp, quick change in the air. All the puppets were motionless, the little breeze that blew shifted their robes slightly but not enough to push them. Sasori hesitated to move also, feeling that there was something wrong with how silent it was, before he decided to continue his assault. He forced his will through his blue chakra strings and as they all moved, barely an inch forward, they all broke apart into equal ribbons, clattering and falling onto the ground uselessly. How did he? Sasori muttered quietly, feeling a small tremor run through his dead wooden body and he hastily suppressed it. Nin Kenjutsu, Snow Leopard Midnight Echolocation, was the quiet reply that came from the blonde Uzumaki. The attack was an attack he had been working on with Aoki-chan to cast an almost invisible extension of his blade multiple times away from him to neutralize enemies of equal strength. It made use of Naruto's abundance in chakra, his control and his extra senses as part spider, while for Aoki-chan she had to make use of a few souls stored in her blade to cast eerie copies of her Omniogen away from her body, sort of like clone jutsu but without the clones and only for weapons. The boy bent down slight and shot forward, stepping on the sand lightly and forcing Sasori to use his Hiriko left arm as a shield as the boy brought down the Kusanagi. He remembered the corrosive poison on the weapon and was able to lean away from it, though Naruto wasn't looking at him again. The boy leveled his Senbon launchers on Deidara, who was again sending birds to him in a last-ditch chance at surprising the spider summoner, and fired numerous finger-length needles, bursting the clay birds messily and having the former Iwa ninja duck away with his hands over his head. Running from the accurate shots coming at him, Naruto saw Sasori quickly bring out a scroll form a storage seal and he kicked his left leg against the hand, breaking it and throwing the scroll away. Now handless and low on ideas, Sasori unhinged his mouth to fire Senbon at Naruto. Next thing he knew he was looking straight at the unforgiving sun, spitting only 7 needles to the sky, which returned back to him harmlessly. He heard a quick slicing sound and black clouds surrounded his vision, creeping from the edges and taking over his consciousness until Sasori of the Red Sands gave up the ghost. Naruto pushed the grass cutter deeper into the heart seal and kicked the limp body away from him, allowing the heart seal to remain on his blade but at the base near the hilt. He rolled his neck and snapped his head to the last of the duo, who was shamelessly running away, the desert ground slowing him down but not stopping him from stumbling through, his eyes wide in terror and his breath coming out as reedy gusts of heat. Deidara gasped and his chest jutted out, ever so slowly a drop of blood crawled out from the corner of his lips and he fell onto his knees weakly. He yelled in pain as the blade was pushed further into his heart, from his back, until the tip shot out from the mouth on his chest, burning the lips pitilessly. The weapon was pushed even more, torturously slowly, until the very tip grazed over the sand. The scientist silently watched on, intrigued, as the mad bomber's shoulders quivered uncontrollably for a few short seconds. I would have loved to fight for longer but alas, I have a personal deadline I have to reach. The red-eyed blonde said smoothly. BB bastard, N.A. Namikas, Deidara tried to move his hands but couldn't, no matter how hard he tried. He could feel his own body rebelling against him, his systems failing and alarms blaring in his head. His neck gently slumped forward and his dull eyes stared at the sand, As his heart began melting in his chest, he saw the world light up bright white, then it all blinked off, making him fall headfirst into the cold, unforgiving darkness. His body fell forward onto the sand, off the boy's long sword, and he died with an unfinished swear on his lips. Too bad, Naruto said with a childish pout. I was having so much fun. He spun the sword in his palm and smoothly slid it back into his backpack, like he was sheathing it on his back. Now let's see, he hummed and looked around. He summoned 3 snakes to take back Deidara's body back to the white snake sage and pulled out the heart seal for a few tiny spiders to take to Sagi, the spider elder. Maybe they could a use for them, it would be such a waste to just leave them out in the desert. The scientist screwed his lips to the side and turned around in a full circle. Which direction is Konoha again? Oh. An hour later, 10 miles west of Konoha. Fire country. Izumo grunted in pain with each helpless effort he used to drag himself away, clawing at the ground and heaving his limp body forward, away from the man that toyed with his very existence. The Allied forces were now focused in Fire country. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of Allied shinobi that were fighting undead in various parts of the country, tirelessly trying to seal them away as best as they could, but the fact remained that these undead shinobi were hard to kill, notwithstanding the fact that they were already dead. They were just too many, and they fought with one mind, though from analyzing them a person had to be within a mile at the very center in order to control all the thousands of undead at the very same time, though they still couldn't find the puppet master. The fighting hadn't yet reached Konoha. Every ninja laid down their lives to keep the attackers away, no matter what it took. They had received news that Naruto's poison was neutralizing every plant clone, so much so that the clones weren't considered problems anymore, more like annoying flies that could be swatted away. The undead still posed the greatest problem, especially when there were big names making their appearance. There was a sealing unit to seal away the undead they managed to neutralize, but it always took a big toll on the Allied forces. There were always casualties. One undead would take down dozens before it could be sealed. If that went on for long, then the world would end and the undead would rule, with the Kabuto Yukushi, the puppet master, as king of the new world. Izumo crawled up to a tree and his muscles tensed agonizingly as he dragged himself to his feet. He faced his undead aggressor, Hanzo of the Salamander, and bared his blood-painted teeth in defiance. Take your best shot. The man shook his head sadly and swung his right fist forward to crush the eternal Chunan's head. Izumo closed his eyes and resigned himself to his fate. Kotetsu was critically injured in the hidden medical bay, Konoha division, and the chances of him living were slim. Might as well join his friend in heaven. Kami knows they tried their best. The air shook with electricity and Izumo cracked open his eyes, only to see that the attacking hand of the former Amekage had been sliced off to his elbow. The masked man looked at his chopped-off limb, then to his right forearm on the ground, and then finally to the culprit standing to his right. A child shaded by a red hood, allowing only a few tufts of blonde hair to spill from the sides and evil vulpine red eyes shining from the darkness of the hood. The ninja was obviously young. The man could feel it despite not being able to clearly see the attacker's face and despite also being about the same height as him, and as he wondered how the boy could cut off his arm, so quickly and efficiently might he add, he was answered when the blonde flashed a thin, spindly leg that hooked over his left shoulder, deadly sharp at the tip. It lifted back up and sliced off his other arm before he could retaliate. Naruto swiftly slammed his left fist into the man's gut, making use of a monumental amount of Kyuubi chakra, and the result was his abdomen exploding from behind him in an outstanding display of dust. Another spider leg shot out from behind the blonde's back again, hooking over his shoulder like the first one, and 2 more erupted from his mid-lower back, curving in to join the rest in facing the former Rain leader. The spider legs were about the same length as Sagi's legs, which, quite frankly, was longer than any normal adult was tall, making it very easy for Naruto to firmly hold the masked man down and spin him in a thick, white web that might as well be as strong as titanium. The deceptively strong but thin legs held the man up at Naruto's command and brought him closer to the boy's face. Hanzo could see a devious smirk cross the mysterious boy's face. I smell snake all over you, Lord Hanzo. Naruto said low enough for the restrained man to hear. The mutated human spider lifted up his hands, his right pointer finger placed on Hanzo's forehead and the other in a half-ram hand seal. Where are you, Kabuto? He asked, more to himself than to anybody, and even at the dead cage's silent struggles the spider legs, sprouted from the boy's back and shoulder blades, held on strong as Naruto absorbed only a drop of the residue of Kabuto's chakra. He separated the strain of chakra and smelt the nature chakra from it, tracing it right back to the shocked snake man. Found you, Naruto said with a wide grin, and another pair of spider legs burst from his lower back, over his pelvis, and these legs aided him in carrying the wrapped-up body of the former rain leader with the 2 legs from his mid-lower back. Without looking back, he shot a single needle to the grievously injured gatekeeper's neck, and Izumo immediately slumped bonelessly against the tree. You'll be fine. And he leaped into the tree line, leaving the unconscious body of the Chunin behind, but also leaving a hand-sized spider to guard his body, just to be on the safe side. The boy moved with the speed of a shadowy red blur, falling down on unsuspecting undead shinobi, spinning them securely in chakra-draining spider webs and leaving before those he had helped could get a firm grasp on his body, but they all knew who he was. You had to be deaf to not hear the haunting cackling that followed the boy like a malevolent ghost. You had to be blind to not see the residue of the webs evaporate into the air from the projectiles he overshot. You had to have a very bad memory to not recognize his chakra. One moment Konoha ninjas were squaring off against undead, fighting with their last breath, and then the next there was a small red blur of speed that descended onto their opponent, wrapped him up in blaringly white webs and flipped off into the tree line, the reincarnated ninja unable to escape from the web. After he had gone, leaving only a thin web string in his wake, there was loud, violent crashing following after him. Trees broke, the ground rumbled, as an entire web ball of writhing undead ninjas rolled after the red spider, carving a path through the ground from its sheer increasing size, with each addition, and with the weight of holding the ninjas in them. The ninjas he had bailed out hastily had to get out of the way, or else they would turn into bloody smears from being crushed by the web ball of undead shinobi. Naruto crash-landed on the Hokage's tower, and with an almighty yank he pulled the humongous bag of writhing humanity with him. The bag dropped down and he caught it in both of his hands raised overhead, and to show the ninjas fighting around, especially those that he had helped, of his presence. Those looking up at him could only see a humanoid creature with 6 spider legs sprouting from his back, holding up a massive white web ball that obviously held undead shinobi, with a few of them groaning piteously from the sides and the bag rumbling ever so slightly. They could see a white beam spread over his hidden face, and he yelled, "I need someone to seal these guys." That drew them out of the daze. Over 6 ninjas of the sealing unit sped out from their stations, and Naruto threw the web ball, casting it over the walls of the village and crashing into a cluster of trees, though the web ball held on strongly. A final pair of spider legs grew from slightly under his lower back but still a bit over his pelvis, and 4 spider legs, the 2 found on his lower back, hefted him off his feet effortlessly, and he skittered around the roof of the Hokage's tower. The boy clicked around briefly until he found the massive window overlooking the building leading directly to the Hokage's office. As he got his feet back under him in Tsunade office, he batted aside 2 white snakes that were thrown at him by the snake summoner, sending over a mental apology to the snakes as they heavily hit the wall and dispersed. "I really hope that wasn't the best you could do, Kabuto," he said, clicking his extra limbs on the ground as he slowly stalked to the scaly white bespectacled man. Kabuto gave a feral hiss, revealing his needle-sharp canines and spitting out acid at the boy, which Naruto had to roll aside for. The green venom the medic spat out sizzled as it hit the wooden door of the cage's office. "I've been waiting for this opportunity for so long," he thought out loud, and Naruto raised an interested eyebrow. "Have you now?" "Yes, and I will make my mistress watch as I kill you." His head shot to a corner of the room, behind the Hokage's desk, which he had been sitting on, and the pale snake Sanin rigidly marched forward. Naruto's eyebrows lowered and his lips tightened when the woman looked at him. The boy felt his heart thud loudly, banging against his ribs. It increased tempo steadily until his blood began boiling and a haze covered his eyes, his jaw clenched powerfully, grinding his sharp teeth against each other, and his fists closed with enough strength for them to crack. Orochimaru smiled forlornly when she saw her godson go under the small, barely seen change from playful and taunting to Uzumaki battle lust. It wasn't something she could train him to suppress, only he could do that, and now, seeing as Kabuto had touched a very delicate nerve, the boy didn't bother holding up his pent-up battle lust, the one he had suppressed in his battle with Sasori and Deidara, the one he had held in when he had gathered the undead shinobi he had passed on his way to Konoha. Naruto had a firm grasp on his emotions, and his self-control was equal to the snake Sanin's, but there were few lines people crossed that he didn't bother holding himself back against. First was stealing from him. Second was hurting his friends, particularly Aoki-chan. Third was hurting his family, specifically Orochimaru. Fourth was undermining him. The last was doing all top 4 at the very same time. And Kabuto had done just that. Few saw Naruto in this side, just about to go feral. The A-rank Ronin saw this the most times and she was forced not to interfere or else she would lose her head as a result. The boy's victims never survived long enough to warn others. Naruto silently bent down into a new fighting style, a drastically upgraded version of the 4-legged shadow spider fighting style. The 12-legged shadow spider fighting style. I am going to enjoy tearing you to pieces, Kabuto. Naruto growled under his breath and Kabuto in turn got into his own fighting style, the shadow snake fighting style, taught to him by the very woman he called mistress. A powerful fighting style in its own right that had been perfected over the years by the very woman that had created it, as well as the first blonde she had ever taught it to, Minato. If used properly it might be able to hold up against the multiple-legged fighting style. That was a big if. The Forest of Death. Konohagakure no Sato. I still feel he is holding back. Madara hummed in thought as his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan spun lazily in his sockets, observing the standoff between Naruto and Kabuto through the Sandaim's glass orb. Obito looked at him in bewilderment. Still, yes, I cannot see him using any tailed beast chakra or nature chakra. What about those spider legs? Those aren't nature chakra constructs. No, they are part of his body, a result of his mutation I assume. He is now only using his own chakra. Madara said with an excited smirk, briefly looking at the one-armed Uchiha beside him then back to the tense standoff. He is as good as you said he was. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.